Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs Co, the show where we'll be getting into everything that has got you talking today. Now, let me tell you what's been on my mind today. I don't know about you, but I am filled with horror at the moment at the ease in which we're suddenly turning against a whole segment of our own society, simply for making a personal medical choice. I speak, of course, of the unvaccinated. Everyday animosity towards the group seems to ramp up a notch, and I, for one, think that it is dangerous and wrong. I'll be discussing that and, importantly, looking at some actual facts surrounding this debate. And another topic that caught my eye today, it now costs £430 million per year to provide housing and payments to people who have claimed asylum in the UK and are waiting for their applications to be processed. How much more evidence do we need that the system is broken? And junk food. Campaigners are once again calling for there to be cigarette-style warning labels on the packaging. Previously, I'll admit, I did think this was a little bit of a nanny state gone mad. But now, we've got to be realistic, because given how many folk are actually obese, I now think this surely is just basic common sense. Am I wrong? Ella Whelan, I'm interested in your thoughts. I wanted to get someone on to kind of start the conversation explaining the stats, because I do worry, and I have this conversation all the time, and there seems to be a lot of confusion, I think, between a lot of people. There's such a big sentiment at the moment that the unvaccinated people are overrunning the hospitals. There's then a big sentiment that actually all of the hospitals are so overwhelmed, and that's why we have to start considering lockdowns. And I'm really quite uncomfortable with the direction that the kind of conversation is taking, because I don't think anyone should be demonised for making a personal medical choice.
No, I don't think people should be demonised, and we see across Europe different countries taking some very authoritarian measures, whether it be specific lockdowns for the unvaccinated or lockdowns because people aren't unvaccinated. There's a particular level of demonisation around the unvaccinated. On the other hand, I think in the UK, the picture is slightly different, because most people have willingly got the vaccine. Most people are quite positive, like I am, very positive about the vaccine, excited about this medical innovation that's come about, particularly in relation to AstraZeneca, excited that we were led the way in that politically, but also, excited about the fact that if you get the booster, as I have done, and many people have done now at this point, you are, as Jamie just said, 80% protected. It means that you're less likely to not just catch it, but also less likely to pass it on. And I think most people are quite positive about that. The small section of society who are still, as Jamie, if you're using the figures that were just mentioned, 48% of people who are unvaccinated ending up in intensive care. I think I care about that, and I think people should care about that. So rather than demonisation, I propose that we use a kind of healthy amount of social pressure, which means talking about the fact of what happens if you are unvaccinated, talking about the risks, trying to persuade people in a friendly and open and not a kind of terrorising manner of why they should get vaccinated. I mean, I'm a volunteer vaccinator, and I'm constantly talking to people about it, about why I think they should. Now, if they said, no, I don't want to, leave me alone, would I press them? No, because you act like a decent person. But if I was to kind of flip it of what the concern that you have, the concern that I have is that the vaccination status is becoming this kind of political football that is bringing out, I think, the worst out of both sides, because we know that our response to this pandemic is not purely an isolated individual approach. This isn't just about a one-man island. We are all connected in relation to our response to this vaccine, but we can do that without going down the illiberal or authoritarian mandated coercive route.
Nabila.
Yes, well, I guess the crux of the matter here is that someone's freedom to avoid vaccination is of huge risk to other members of society. But I think if you want to take very strict precautions to try to avoid infection, you still can do that. And in the end, in my view, is that it's all about tolerance and structuring your life as you choose. Just like Ella, I'm a great believer in the progress of medicine. I have great faith in medicine. I think it has improved the lives of millions of people, increased life expectancy massively. And I think maybe it's about time that there was a cultural change about taking medicine. In the end, it's not as a big deal, as much as a big deal. And I think there are, of course, very legitimate concerns about this horrific pandemic, but Britain remains a Western democracy based on liberal values. And I really don't like the way the government it seems to be wanting to stigmatise non-vaccinated people. And this, by definition, in my view, is damaging for society. I mean, let's not forget that the Tory party has always focused on freedoms, including individual freedoms, ironically, the individual freedoms to be very unhealthy, including smoking and drinking to yourself to ill health. And yes, I think I wouldn't personally show prejudice against someone who would choose not to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and Michael, I mean, I'm getting contact emails and tweets coming in, you know, really quickly about this. And Justin says, well, if you don't get vaccinated, Michelle, and you end up in hospital with COVID, then you should receive the bill. And this is something that I hear frequently, and it's something that I personally wholly disagree with.
Yeah, look, I think people are not going to be, those who haven't had the vaccine yet, are not going to be bullied into it. I think Tony Blair's intervention there is completely counterproductive because people may actually end up digging their heels in if you just throw insults at them. I think what we also need to consider is the fact that when we look at the vaccine now, originally, obviously, people were told to get 2, now a booster. We now know in Israel, people are actually being urged to have a 4th vaccine. And something that I want to see more debate around is what is the long-term path here? Because if, say, and we know that the Omicron, it looks like it's more mild as a variant, what are we going to do this time next year if another variant pops up, for instance? What is the likelihood of that? Because from what I'm seeing and what I've been reading, the likelihood of us seeing variants spring up right across the world over the medium to long term is quite likely. And so in that case, are we going to be looking at a society where we have a government consistently looking at what liberties they're going to take away and give back to us? Are people going to realistically need to go and get a 1 booster a year in perpetuity, 2 or 3 moving forward? And this, in terms of the long-term outlook of this, I think is something the government needs to be honest about, because if they're honest about what this is likely to look like over the coming months and years, then I think people will be more trusting. But I certainly don't want to live in a country where we're constantly under the threat every Christmas of what restrictions are we looking at this year.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one thing that I've always been really quite strict on is I don't discuss my vaccination status publicly. I've always said from day one, it's nobody's business what's gone into my body except my own. And if I ever need any treatment for anything, then, of course, the medical professional that's helping me needs to know my situation. I've always felt, and I now feel, actually, that I was right to feel this way, that what's happening is it's almost going to become a position of virtue. Because, yeah, OK, you have your vaccine, then you have your second one, then you're in a position, a lot of people are now in a position where it's like, well, shall I have my 3rd one? Shan't I have my 3rd one? I'm not really sure what to do. So then some people will choose to have 3, some people won't. And then it's all about talking about places like Israel, your 4th. And I think that it just makes me uneasy. I've never known a scenario where people almost demand to know what have you had, when have you had it, which one did you have, what are you going to do about your 3rd, what about this, what about that? I honestly, well, I say it on here all the time, it's nobody's business. And I worry, Ella, that we're going to get to a point where it's like, it is almost like a point of virtue. You see it, I see it on people's Instagram, you know, the profiles. I'm vaxxed, I've got Pfizer in my veins, I've got 3 shots, I'm boosted. I think it's a bit weird.
I don't know that I think there's anything wrong with it. I think I probably put up an Instagram picture saying that I was boosted.
But why?
Just because I think that, well, I just did it because I like putting up pictures of myself and a bit vain, but it's no reason more serious than that. But I think most people understand on a more serious political note that we are in a unique moment. Okay, it's not an emergency anymore, and the problem that the government has is that it's extending the idea that we're in an emergency because it's easier for the government to not give back our freedom. I mean, the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, I think the other day said, oh, well, we need to start giving people a little bit of freedom or they're going to get antsy, you know, as if it's just this thing that governments can gift to citizens. It's ridiculous. But in relation to vaccination, we know that, you know, Nabila talked about the kind of wonder of science. We have a problem on our hands over the last 2 years now coming on to. We've got this virus that initially we knew nothing about. We now know a lot more about that. Does pose a very serious threat to significant sections of society, not just the unvaccinated, but the elderly and the infirm. When we know that the government was slow to off the mark to roll out the booster programme among the elder population. So we know that it still poses a relative threat. There are still quite large amounts of people dying, by the way, every day. So this isn't over yet. It's not an emergency, but it's not over yet. And I think a lot of people are proud of the fact that we have, as a civilised society, come up with a solution in the form of a vaccine. I think it should be a positive thing. I think it's devastating that it has become this negative political football, that it has become this coercive measure. No, it's no one's business what you put into your body in relation to your medical history. But I think that we have lost the positive sense that our fight back against this virus is a social thing, that we all come together to do things, whether it be helping people shield, whether it be volunteering, whether it be going out and get your booster, which I think everyone should, if they want to. It's a very good thing to do to protect yourself and others. Okay. But why does it have to be negative? It could have been a positive thing, and I think the government has squandered that positivity.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, I'm going to read out some of your responses to this. So do let me know what your thoughts are on this. Are you someone who, you think this is great, and you are someone that I'm referring to that does go on your social media and talk about how many of these you've had? Would there ever be a point, though, when you might start going, not sure about this, I'm on my 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, whatever it is? Let me know. I'm intrigued by that kind of mindset. I'm gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at gbnews. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be looking at the cost for helping asylum seekers. I'll give you a clue. It's almost doubled to £430 million. We'll be looking at that and more after the break. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs Co. That last topic has certainly got you guys talking. There's quite a mixed response, actually. Many of you agree with me. Many of you completely disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. I like all different opinions on this show. Dave said, Diane says, I'm 81 on Boxing Day. My husband is 84 in May. I haven't had the vaccine because I had a very bad reaction, she says, to a different type of vaccine previously. And now they feel very upset and feel like pariahs, they say. We're not selfish. We very rarely go out, and we now try and stay in. Paul says, I'm double jabbed myself, so therefore I couldn't care less who chooses not to. Lionel says, I cannot understand your sympathy, Michelle, towards the unvaccinated people. They are selfish, and they are taking NHS resources away from those requiring care, despite being fully jabbed. Jacqueline says, I am vaccinated, but I struggled after my last one, and I don't want any more doses, and I'm worried I'm going to be ostracised because of this. Dawn says, thanks, Michelle, for airing this important and painful subject. Kevin says, NHS staff have to be vaccinated forever. People can choose not to work in the health industry and keep their anti-vaxxer credentials if they want. Get over it. John says, well, I would rather be an idiot than be responsible for millions of deaths. And William says, how many jabs do you need before you say enough is enough? See, there you go. I told you. Lots of divided opinions on that one, and do keep them coming in. Let's move on to a different story now. Analysis from Migration Watch UK has found that the price of supporting asylum seekers has doubled in the last 3 years. It now costs £430 million per year to provide housing and payments to people who have claimed asylum in the UK and are waiting for their applications to be processed. Costs are set to rise by another £100 million next year, but dozens of residents are asking to be rehoused because they're saying that the accommodation provided by the Home Office is, I quote, not fit to live in. Goodness me, how much more evidence do we need that the system is broken, Michael?
Well, I think this is, one of the outcomes of the complete chaos we've seen with the government losing control. And obviously, this year, I think we've seen 28,000 people come across from France illegally on small boats to England. That's treble the number we saw in 2020. And 2020 was a quadrupling on the year before that, 2019. So in terms of where we're going on this, the costs are set to escalate even further. I mean, when you look at the figures in this story, We're now projecting 80,000 people, housing and payments, £537 million a year. And unless the government change course on this and get far tougher, we are going to see this dangerous situation, unfortunately, continue to get even worse. Because, of course, we've seen the French authorities, even after being given tens of millions of pounds by the British government, we've seen occasions where the French authorities have sat on the beaches and watched this go on. So I think time has come now that the government say very clearly, anyone who comes to the UK, and by the way, people doing this, coming across on small boats, it should be made absolutely clear they will not be allowed to stay. And the government make clear that this is actually illegal, arrest them, put them on a boat, back to France. The French will go absolutely ballistic, and guess what? We'll actually stop this from escalating even further next year, which on current trajectory is exactly what's going to happen. It's going to get even worse next year.
Do you agree?
Well, I think if a Western liberal democracy runs an asylum system, then it's bound to be extremely expensive. This is especially so when so many people around the world know about it and want to travel to the UK to test it effectively. And this is no different to any other system, including the British justice system, for example, which makes sure that justice is available for as many people as possible. And that, by definition, is costing billions of pounds to the British government. So in that respect, it costs a huge amount of money as well. And it's easy to forget that the technology has advanced in so many ways over the past 2 decades, and there are people from far-flung countries who know about the UK and want to come over here to indeed exploit the system. But there will also be very genuine cases of asylum seekers or people fleeing war or famine, and who will be others who will be very straightforward economic migrants. And I think humanity is primarily, or the world is primarily, driven by economics, and everybody in the end wants a better life for themselves, and they will travel to make it happen effectively.
Yeah, Ella, I mean, Nabila's there saying, you know, if you want to have an asylum system, any country, you're going to have bills attached to that, and that's, of course. But there'll be many people watching this programme, Ella, that think that this is grossly unfair, I guess, on them as taxpayers, that someone can illegally enter a country and essentially be provided with hotels, healthcare, whatever else it is, and legal aid whilst their applications are being processed.
You could look at it that way. You could also understand that many of the people who've been, who are reaching these shores via seeking asylum are coming from places that have been disrupted because of the actions of British governments. I mean, going right back to Blair's moves, when he was in government, right up to what's just happened in Afghanistan a few months ago. You know, it's not, these asylum seekers are not dropping out of the sky. They're not poking out of the blue.
No, but they're largely from France.
They are coming, well, they originally are coming from places which, due to the decisions taken by Western politicians and the chaos wreaked in Middle Eastern countries and places across the world, that they have created asylum seekers. That is true. What's also true is that, you know, if you look at the numbers, back in 2002, the kind of peak of asylum seekers happened then when it was about 84,000. In 2019, it was only about 36,000, and in 2010, it was about 18,000. So it has dipped a lot in the last kind of 20 years. But the costs of 430 million, it's not like these asylum seekers are living it up in 5-star hotels, kind of like, you know, sitting out on the balconies, enjoying the few bits of sun that we get in the UK. Lots of them are living in squalor. Lots of them very deeply want to become citizens. They want to become citizens to be afforded the benefits.
But many of them are put up in very nice hotels, though, Ella. You'd concede that, right?
Not very many of them. In fact, lots of them end up in, you know, either detention centres like Yarlswood, endlessly waiting without any contact or details of their application. Priti Patel's talking about setting up new things which are called reception areas, which sound like glorified prisons. The system of asylum is brutal and inhumane in many cases. I think, if you want to talk about humane options, we have a labour shortage in the UK. We have lots of things that we need people to do. We have lots of space for people. We can take in a lot more people. I think what's wrong with, rather than longing out asylum, the process of asylum over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, which will cost a huge amount of money, why not make people to citizens much quicker, get them in work, get them afforded the benefits that you have as a citizen in relation to healthcare, but also contributing to society? Why do we have to take such a negative view in relation to this?
It's interesting to mention the labour shortage, because, of course, one of the things myself and many Brexiteers argued was, if we left the European Union, we had lower migration, we'd actually see wages for British workers rise, which we're actually now seeing. Now, the bosses call it labour shortage. What you've actually got at the moment is a workers' market. You're seeing companies offer thousands of pound bonuses because they're desperate to get workers in and are having to raise pay and conditions. Now, I actually think that's a good thing. And I think this country should stop operating on a high migration, and I'm talking about in the hundreds of thousands, 200, 300,000 each year, because I think the evidence is already, if you bring net migration down, British workers get paid more because it forces bosses and companies to raise pay, raise conditions, and I think that's a good thing.
As a Brexit voter, equally myself, I understand where you're coming from, but I think setting up a position between British workers and migrant labour is not what I'm going for here. I think that's a pretty reactionary view. But
that's the evidence of what we're seeing now.
But if people become citizens of this country, they become British workers, right? Because if you become a British citizen, you become a British worker, and you're no longer a migrant or an asylum seeker. That's what I'm talking about. Now, the whole question around labour shortages makes me slightly itchy because I don't like that. You know, it was a particular line, you're right, from lots of Remainers who said, well, who's going to pour our coffees? Who's going to do this? Who's going to pick our fruit? And I'm not interested in treating migrants in that kind of instrumental way. But I think that I think what we have at the moment around a discussion about migration is this fallacy that Britain is this tiny island that can't take any more people in, that there is a opposition between British workers fighting for better wages and migrants undermining that. That has always been a reactionary position of people who want to undermine the sense of class solidarity. And instead, we should look about this a bit more in the round.
But hang on, I'm confused by what you're saying. You're saying there's a fallacy that this is an island. This is an island with finite resources. We've got a situation where schools are overstretched, GP surgeries are overstretched. We're about to have
housing.
Housing. So
all of that, yeah.
But we do have finite resources, services, capacity, and that is just a fact. So why would you say that that's a fallacy?
It's not necessarily a fact. It doesn't have to be a fact. I think we have to get away from this kind of fatalistic outlook of the kind of pretense of scarcity. This is an island that has a huge amount of resources. What we have is a lack of political will. We don't have enough houses because there's not enough bricks. We don't have enough houses because politicians won't put in the resources to build enough houses. Now, I don't think migrants should suffer at the fault of that lack of political will.
And dare I say, if we have a humane asylum system offering accommodation, then it should be clean and efficient. And as it happens, there's plenty of evidence that accommodation being offered to asylum seekers is not fit to live in. And these are people who are not criminals, who have done nothing wrong. There's actually evidence that there are people who suffer from torture, who are being put in crowded situations. These are very vulnerable people who are entitled to decent conditions while waiting for the asylum process.
You're going to think this is a really awful point I'm going to make, but crossing a border illegally, I would say that is a criminal act.
You're a criminal.
Well, these are very vulnerable and desperate people who, for most of them, want to come over here to test the cases to seek asylum and to seek a better life, ultimately. And Britain brands itself and indeed prides itself in being,
let me ask you this
humane society.
So you're telling me you think it's inhumane for someone who is illegally entered a country to then be collected by a lifeboat, brought over to shore, put into hotels, given food vouchers, given medical assistance, given legal aid? You're telling me you think that's inhumane?
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying this is the debate we're having. If Britain is indeed
Have you seen some of the places these people are staying in?
There's people that serve this country that are living on the streets that don't even have anything over their head. They're outside.
Why do you have to
why don't we sort our own house in order before we start giving away more houses to people who've come into the country illegally?
If you start setting up the idea of there's us and them...
British citizens who have served this country before people who have come into this country illegally is a very sensible thing to do, I think.
The politicians throughout the ages have made the kind of British jobs for British workers, British people first argument. I think it smacks of a kind of reactionary politics that isn't international in its outlook and doesn't cut really to the heart of the matter, which is why can't we all argue for more? I'd put the question to the Tories of saying, why aren't you building more houses for the very small number of us, like relatively speaking, the small number of asylum seekers, but the whole rest of us as well
to abide by.
We do. Well, I think actually Ella's final throwaway comment there is get some perspective. Well, I'm interested in you. you at home. Ella reckons that basically this is a political will, that I'm saying that there's a lack of school places, there's a lack of GPs appointments, there's a lack of capacity pretty much everywhere, quite frankly. Ella says that's political will. I would say it's because actually it is a fact that we have finite resources, whether that's finite trained doctors or surgeries or whatever it is. But Ella's comment there, the final comment, was get some perspective. So tell me, what's your perspective? GBviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at gbnews. I've got to say, that conversation is one that I'm sure all of us could have continued for quite some time, but I do have to move on to something else. So I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be talking about junk food. Do you think junk food should have the same kind of health warnings as what you're seeing on your screen there, which was the cigarette ones? Don't go away. Hello there, welcome back. I can tell you lots of you are getting in contact about that last debate, and I'll read out some of your views in just a moment. But first, I want to just move the story on, the conversation on, if I may, because junk food, that has been in the news again today. Don't mind admitting I'm a bit partial to it myself, but the conversation is all around, should we have basic kind of health warnings similar to cigarettes? You know, the warnings that you see with the old kind of mangled organs and stuff like that on the cigarette packets. Researchers are saying that ultra-processed foods are the new tobacco. This research comes after the NHS had over 11,000 hospital admissions directly attributed to obesity. So what do you reckon? Should we be treating things like sugary snacks and fizzy drinks no differently to how we label cigarettes? Nabila?
Yes, I think, you know, there was a time when warning labels on cigarette packs would have seemed inconceivable, and now we have the most terrifying images on packets, and it's almost incredible that anybody smokes at all, given the warnings. But society is changing, and it's changing very rapidly, and with the health crisis like the coronavirus pandemic, for example, which is threatening us all, I think prevention of disease is just as important as cure these days, and we live in an age where we are lucky to be one of the best informed generations, and we can look up information almost instantly. And I think the warnings are actually responding to a demand for knowledge from customers, and checking labels and ingredients is something that we should all be entitled to. So I'm not too sure about, you know, the gory images aimed at us of buying a product, for example, but I think that health dangers should be highlighted sensibly.
Ella?
I disagree. I think that the thing that happened with cigarettes is, it's not just because I like the occasional cigarette and I hate those pictures, but the main reason why people gave up cigarettes recently was through the introduction of vaping. You saw a massive drop in people smoking rates in the introduction of vaping, because that was an easy way and a comfortable way and an enjoyable way for people to stop smoking and then eventually give up completely. There's not a huge amount of evidence that shows that simply looking at human beings are so kind of stupid and simple that simply looking at a nasty image makes us not want to do it. It doesn't quite work like that in relation to advertising. But more importantly, crisps, processed food, chocolate, stuff like that is not the same as smoking. It's not the same as alcohol. I think what we really should be doing is talking more. I think we've for too long played down the importance of agency, of people's ability to make decisions. Maybe have one cigarette a week, maybe have a couple of chocolate bars a week. So if people want to eat loads and get fat, that's their position, that's their choice. I mean, Michelle, you started the programme by talking about the fact that it's your choice whether or not you get vaccinated, and that you won't give that information out to anyone. That's a very strong defence of your moral agency that I very much agree with, and I think it applies here too. People should, if you live in a free country, you should be able to access things freely without feeling, the term nanny state gets thrown around a lot by a lot of different people. But I think this really feels like government breathing down people's necks when it either doesn't work, and also it's, it annoys people. I think that's quite a serious.
Michael's itching to
it's not going to be very pleasant going around the supermarkets with all these horrific images, is it? I mean, look, I think this is a nanny state stuff. I think it's way over the top, and I don't think it's very positive. I think we need to be realistic. We are, as a society, the Western world, we have got serious health problems with obesity and things like that, and especially if we go into an economy where more and more people are going to be sat in their front rooms or in their bedrooms working from home all the time. And something I certainly think would be much more positive I go and smash the gym, generally within reason. I can eat what I want, and you know, if you're exercising regularly, that helps. I would like to see a real push to encourage kids, maybe put it in the curriculum, to start introducing children going to the gym and exercising so they're more familiar with gyms. I think that'd be a very positive thing to do, instead of putting horrific images on food labels. Let's get Britain fitter and recognise that physical fitness as well as mental health is incredibly important.
Well,
and then you can have loads of kebabs.
I think what we're talking about as well is
kids.
the freedom to access that kind of information, that, you know, we make up our minds in the end. You can eat yourself to your ill health, but what is at stake here is to have access to information, basically guidance that tells you that's wrong for you, effectively. And I think, you know, what's clear, I mean, we have great evidence that junk food is you know, far more of a threat than any perceived dangers from a COVID jab, for example. So I think we should put things into perspective, because it effectively affects the health of the nation. We're not talking about coercive measures, but guidance for people to lead a better and
people know
healthier
junk
life.
foods are healthy.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is you know, there's this sort of, I think there's this idea that people don't realise that eating 5 packets of crisps a day is going to make you obese. People do realise that. The question is, why are they doing it? And I think it's not that there's this sort of, it tends to take a quite anti-working class line a lot of the time, which is that there is this massive fat public out there who just are so thick that they keep eating fast food and they don't realise it. And what we need to do as a very educated state is put information on and labels to kind of tell them off and make sure that they make the right choices. I mean, I don't know about people, you know, getting people to smash the gym. I think gyms are dystopian places where you run for no reason. But I think that...
You run to stay healthy.
Yeah, but what about opening up more public playgrounds? What about opening up, having more communal sports, having things that are enjoyable for people? If you probably...
It's enjoyable.
You really,
Try
yeah,
it.
I have tried the gym. I think it's an awful place. I like doing the legs, bumps and tums with a whole bunch of other women. You know, doing things like that, having more resources for society rather than trying to narrow people's choices. I think the government is always, whether it's in relation to coronavirus or this, it wants to narrow people's choices. Why not open them up?
Well, I know you're desperate to come back and tell me again about the gym.
I would recommend it, yeah.
I know he does. He recommends the gym, but
much better.
Yeah, I do have to. Well, I don't have to, but I want to move on because I just want to squeeze a little something in before we finish that made me smile. You know, it's all about the Secret Santa at the moment, isn't it? What would be your gift if you had a Secret Santa? I've got to say, we do Secret Santa in my own family. There's so many of us, it costs a fortune, so we just do a Secret Santa. I think we're a bit tight. But what would you consider? Maybe a chocolate, a selection box, something funny, or I don't know what. The children's charity Bernardo's have released images of some of their most absurd donations this year. The reason I'm linking this to Secret Santa is because apparently when it comes to Secret Santa, that's what a lot of people are doing, making donations to a charity. Staff have received donations including a scorpion preserved in a jar of formaldehyde, which has actually since been given to the local university. They've got a farmer's lamb castrating tool. What? This is some of their top donations. In Glasgow, a handbag was donated with a set of false teeth inside. Staff apparently were really chuffed with this jacket donation until they found some leftover Domino pizza in the pocket. A local Bernardo's in Wales was sent this used toilet brush. Who would do that? And another of their favourites this year was a donation by a man named Jeff. And how do we know his name? Well, accompanied with his donation of his underwear was a poem. It says this: wear these at your leisure, wear with pride and pleasure, and keep them safe to treasure, with a lovely kiss at the end. Honestly, I always maintain this. I think there are some absolute weirdos out there in this society. If you was doing donations to charities, would you donate any of the above toilet brushes? Who does that?
No, I need my toilet brush, unfortunately, so I won't be giving that away this Christmas. I mean, I've had some pretty appalling presents over the years. So some very good ones as well, I should point out. But no, certainly I hope Santa doesn't leave any of those under my Christmas tree.
But who would even give underwear to... I wouldn't give my used underwear
I don't think
Sharing is
most
caring, I
people
guess.
wouldn't, but you do that thing where you clear out the cupboard of all the stuff you're going to throw out, and then you do just chuck it in a bag. And I have to make myself consciously pick out all the stuff that doesn't have holes in it. I don't quite go down the used knickers line, but anything that doesn't have holes in it. But sometimes you might throw something by accident.
I
in there.
guess it's also the kind of stuff that probably meant a lot to someone at some point before it became obsolete. But I think
Recycling.
the real danger is when some people might drop off shells or something.
Well, I think
sure it happens.
check your pockets. False teeth and bits of pizza. How gross. Anyway, of course, so I do obviously advocate donating to charity, just not the weird stuff like your teeth and your pants. Keep them to yourself, quite frankly.
You do need them.
Anyway,
Yeah.
what, your teeth? And your pants?
And your pants.
Well, you probably
They're
need both of
recommended,
them.
aren't
Yeah,
they?
keep hold of your smalls and your teeth. Anyway, that's pretty much all we've got time for. Panel, thank you very much for your time and for your company. Thank you as well to you at home for your company. We've really enjoyed it tonight. And I will be back tomorrow, exactly the same time, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Have a great evening, and I'll see you then.